With the championship seeing more ups and downs than the first sector of Knockhill, we take you through the championship connotations. Knockhill Review.
Hello and welcome back to the British Touring Car Podcast. We have finally made it back from Knockhill after a very long drive today. You're quite tired, aren't you? We're both quite tired. But it was well worth the trip, which you'll hopefully see quite a bit of in our vlog videos that will be coming out on YouTube. If you aren't already subscribed, do give us a click on there, get the bell on, and if you're an audio listener only, then go and find us over on YouTube and subscribe as well. But we shall get straight into the weekend at Knockhill, and there's no better place to start than in qualifying. So qualifying on Saturday then was a wet to dry session, or a dry line at least. It was through changeable conditions, had a big old downpour just before the session started, so everyone went out on wet tyres first of all, and it took about 15 minutes for the session to start to dry up, and it was actually Rob Huff who was in this weekend, possibly in place of Hamilton, although not in the same livery car. That's something we'll probably discuss at a later stage. He was the first driver to change onto the slick tyre, with around 15 minutes to go, with the BMWs quickly following, with three of them outside of the top 10 at that point. This was a top 10 shootout this weekend, so all the drivers were aiming to try and get inside that top 10 for that final 10-minute session and a shot at pole position. The biggest casualty of this probably was Camish, who went off and rejoined after going quickest with just 6 minutes left. However, there was quite substantial damage to the front end. It looked like he'd taken off the front splitter.
Second time he's messed it up in qualifying this season.
Yep.
But of course, at this point, he was still very much in the running for the championship, as you would have insisted. But it's mistakes like that are the reason why Sutton is so far ahead and Camish is not.
At that point, he was in the running to still be in the top 10 shootout, but the track evolved really quickly. And so far left him down in 23rd on the grid for race 1 on Sunday. There was big shuffling about with drivers setting faster and faster times on dry tyres. I think at one point Edwards went quickest and we were like, oh, hang on a minute, will she actually get through into the top 10 and have her best qualifying session ever? But it wasn't to be for her, unfortunately. Halstead had a trip through the gravel. It's a qualifying session. It happens nearly every time. And Jelly had a spin at the chicane, which caused a red flag with just 45 seconds left on the clock. However, the race officials decided to give an extra 5 minutes, reset it, for all drivers to go back out and try and set better times. I think this was more crucial because the track was drying and times were getting better, and that 45 seconds, someone could have lost out on getting that final lap in.
And there was a top 10 to consider as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they made the right call, to be fair. I don't like the red flag rule anyway. I get why it has to happen, but Jelly got himself going again.
He did.
Didn't necessarily need a red flag. But I get why it's done, and I get it, and I understand it. But I think they made the right decision to go out for another 5 minutes.
Yeah, so with the 5 minutes extra put back on the clock, all drivers went out once more, apart from Camish with his damage. Rowbottom, Camish, Collard were probably the big names to miss out on Q2, but with drivers like Moffat, Lloyd, and...
Well, I've got the top 10 here if you want it.
Yeah, go on. And Chilton also to get through.
Hill, Cook, Sutton, Ingram, Moffat, Butcher, Lloyd, Chilton, Turkington, Morgan, the top 10. So as you say, you had Collard, ATS, Rowbottom missing out. Gamble, potentially a name you would expect. Jelly down in 18th, wasn't great for him. Obviously, you already mentioned Camish. And Michael Crease, 25th, not a good...
No, not a good session from him, and not an overly good weekend for him, which we'll probably mention at times. Going into the pole position shootout then, there were many times deleted due to track limits throughout both sessions, but it was left right until the last moment, and by almost the smallest of margins, but Ash Sutton, with a full commitment lap, especially through that chicane over the hill, managed to go 6 thousandths quicker than Cook to take pole position, the 7th in a row for Napa.
Do you think they'll get all 10?
it's difficult to see past it. However,
because I think the BMW tracks have gone.
However, Cook is looking quick.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
I was really quite surprised by his pace this weekend, and Ingram is always a possible bet at somewhere like Silverstone.
The setup with that Ford at Silverstone's going to blitz it.
We'll see.
The top 10 from the shootout then: Sutton from Cook from Hill, Butcher 4th. I think that's got to be his best of the season, probably.
Yeah.
Ingram 5th, Morgan, Moffat, Turkington, Chilton, and Lloyd rounding out the top 10. Good effort by Lloyd.
Yeah.
Team Hard have clearly got their problems at the moment, which I will probably reflect on in my final thoughts when we get there. But Lloyd has done well this weekend and generally this season at keeping his head and just trying to keep as consistent as possible in difficult conditions.
Yes, very much so. So we'll get on to race 1 now, which we were obviously in attendance for, and chaos ensued.
Yep, so we were stood at the bottom of Duffer's Dip with a view up to the Black Circle chicane, which was very nice indeed. Good part of the track to watch from. As it was a dry start, we saw the usual mix of tyres. Most people ran the softs, although Stephen Jenny was the furthest forward to start on the mediums. He was down in 18th, as we said. Rowbottom stopped out on the formation lap due to issues with the car. Again, it's not been his weekend, to be fair to him, and he's not done an awful lot wrong. He misses out by 3 places in quali. That can happen.
Yep.
And then technical gremlins with the car mean that he's pushed to the side at the end of the formation lap. Sutton led the pack away off the line, as you'd expect. Got the start nailed. No pit wall action for him this weekend, so good for him. Ingram managed to nip past Butcher as Butcher was trying to get past Hill. Butcher then became incredibly aggressive, started banging door handles, and I thought was actually going to send Ingram round because he hit him very hard on the rear.
I think it might just be a Toyota trait. If you drive a Toyota, you've got to be aggressive, apparently, now.
Yeah, Arshon Gamble.
A little bit, but we've seen him knock some doors this weekend.
That's true. We then saw Sutton make a mistake, which is a collector's item in racing when he's actually off the line. I know he's made a couple off the line this season, but in terms of pure race, actual racing, he managed to drop it on the outside of Hislops and sent the car very well, turny, slidey.
Their words.
You look okay. And thankfully for him, Josh Cook was there to use a bit of an air brake. Otherwise, Sutton would have probably gone all the way around.
Yeah. Clipped Cook's rear end, knocked Cook slightly, but Cook still had the momentum to get past him, and Sutton was then able to carry on in a straight line as well.
It wasn't looking to be a particularly good race for Napa at this point because Osborne and Camish made quite a big bit of contact themselves going through Duffer's Dip up towards the chicane. Camish trying to make positions through the grid. I did say that when Osborne's in the pack, there's a potential for him to be caught up.
Yep.
I wasn't wrong. Sutton then started to try the fight back on Cook with Hill lurking behind, and then end of lap 6, the rain began.
Yeah, the rain didn't just begin everywhere though, did it? Came in fairly gently at first, down towards the hairpin, and our first realisation from where we were standing was that they had their wipers on coming through Duffers and our area of the circuit. And
was it our realisation or was it my realisation?
I'm
fair sure I pointed out that the wipers are on.
And I was present. And I was sort of like, I wonder where it's coming from. Then it came across.
It was my observation because you were faffing about taking photos.
Sorry, I was getting content for us.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, but then the rain came in rather heavily.
It did, and all across the circuit. Cook and Sutton were putting on a masterclass on how to race in the wet, hard, on the wrong tyre, still trying to overtake each other, still trying to go run side by side down Duffer's Dip, all on the wrong tyre, which was fantastic to see. But then it all did go wrong. Inevitably went wrong with, I think it's Cook's fault. You think it's more Sutton's, but we both agree it's racing incident.
It's more of a racing incident than anything else. Having seen the couple of replays that there are, it's a bit of Sutton's around the outside. Yes, he's managed to find a good line somehow in that rain, and Cook has understeered really coming through the first corner.
Yeah, and Cook has clipped his rear against Sutton. Sutton doesn't move. I think that's the key for me. Sutton's car doesn't. Well, it's moving forward, but the line doesn't deviate. Whereas Cook gets the bit of a tank slapper and then catches sort of his front against Sutton's rear, and because it's so wet, it just sends him off at speed. What I think is key is that Cook It's completely accepted as a racing incident. There's
Yeah.
no anger, no. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I know they're friends, but
the interview before the following race,
Yeah.
it was very much like, we came together. That happens in those conditions,
Yeah.
and they weren't the only drivers to come together in those conditions.
No, Lloyd would be off the road a couple of laps later from contact from Aaron Taylor-Smith. I'm amazed Taylor Smith got away without a penalty for this, but I guess the clerk went, look, it's wet, you're all on the wrong tyres, cut a bit of slack. But I've got no idea how Sutton kept going for so long and kept such a gap at the front.
I've got a list here of drivers that came into the pits to start changing to wet tyres and the laps that they came in. So the first drivers came in on lap 8. So that was Osborne, Jelly, Chilton, Pearson, Huff, De Leon and Boutel all came in to change onto wet tyres. Yes, they knew they were going to lose time and drop to the back of the field, but they would be on the optimum tyre. The drivers at the front, I can understand why they're less likely to make that call straight away, because if it's just a short, sharp shower, there is the possibility that it may get back to drier conditions.
Well, they saw it in qualifying the day before.
Exactly. First lot of people came in on lap 8. Morgan, Turkington, Collard, Watson, Gamble, Patterson and Halstead followed them in on lap 9. And then crucially, Ingram and Aaron Taylor-Smith came in on lap 10, followed by Hill and Dobble on lap 11. Sutton stayed all the way up until lap 18.
Yeah,
10 laps.
And in those 10 laps, I know people were pitting and finding, but he didn't lose any time at the front. He was lapping...
Not much.
He was lapping only about half a second slower than Ingram, who was the front running wet at that point. I mean, yeah. People are going to get bored about how much we praise Sutton, but because he is winning the title by a country mile, and he is going to win it by a country mile. Having this point gap at this stage of the season is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
But I think that you're looking at one of the top 3 most talented natural drivers to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, top 3, top 5, certainly.
If he stays in the sport, he won't just beat Rouse's record, he will annihilate it.
Yeah, as long as he has that drive and that passion to keep going, rather than go off and do other types of motorsport or anything like that, then he's just going to choose a different car a couple of years down the line and do it in something else, because that's what he seems to be doing at the moment.
I wouldn't put past him to bring a Land Rover to the party. It's ridiculous.
That might have been helpful this weekend.
Yeah, that's true, actually. But he is just ridiculous, and we're running out of superlatives to say about him, but I don't know how he managed to keep that going in those conditions for that long, but he did.
He did have a small off.
He did,
didn't he?
Yep.
But he managed to gather it back up and came in at the end of the safety car period.
Safety car caused by Crease, who slid off apparently on his own.
Yeah,
from the replay we saw. Yeah, and couldn't get it started again, but then got pushed out of the grass. He just couldn't light the wheels up because it was so wet. When Sutton pitted at the end of that safety car period, Moffat then became the leader. He was still on slicks himself, as was Rory Butcher.
Yep.
Although that wasn't to last much longer because Moffat went off on his own and Butcher then slid off and smacked into the side of Morgan in what was stupid by Butcher.
I don't think he's got much control. He was on slicks as well, remember. He's gone through round the side of the chicane at the top of the hill and tried to rejoin with absolutely no grip at all.
It smacks to me that he's not seen Morgan.
Possibly as well. We know how difficult it is to see out the side windows in these cars, and the angle that he's coming at, you've got tyres over here next to you. It is his fault, in my eyes.
Agreed. DeLine then had off under the safety car as well and damaged his car. And then this was a balmy, and some children got quite angry afterwards, and I can understand his anger. I'll jump to that in a minute, but lots of confusion under the safety car because the rule in touring cars is that the safety car picks up the leader.
Yeah.
Which meant that any cars before Ingram were allowed to pass the safety car.
Yes.
Any cars that were lapped and out of position after Ingram weren't, which is a stupid rule.
Yes,
Let all lap cars. I know you don't like what happened at Abu Dhabi 21, and I'm not going to go into.
It's not.
I'm not going to go into
that.
No, but I'm not going to go into that. But let lap cars through.
I can understand why lap cars aren't let through in touring cars.
Why?
Because one, the time it takes for them to catch back up. Two,
it's a tiny circuit.
Two, the conditions that we had this weekend.
But they don't let anyone go through. It's nonsense. The point is, your whole argument is undone by the fact that several cars were allowed to go through and catch up with the back and go fast.
Yeah, but they only wanted the leader.
Yeah, but your whole argument is undone by the
You'll
fact
then, because there aren't as easy radio communications in touring cars, you'll struggle more to let through those cars who are out of position.
But they've all got radios, and race control can put like in F1 could put a thing out saying all lap cars can now unlap themselves. It's not difficult.
A lot of drivers probably didn't know that they were lapped.
But everyone's got,
because we saw that after the restart, that then lapped drivers weren't then letting drivers through.
No, which is again farcical. Well, added to that is then the mess that happened on the restart because everyone was out of position and people started trying to overtake cars that were being lapped before the safety car had gone in, and we then saw a load of penalties given out afterwards.
I'm not sure whether that was for then. I'm really unclear on the penalties that have been given out this weekend, which we will get to at the end. But yes, there was a little bunching of cars before the restart in one of the races.
Race 1.
Where that's just people not paying attention.
Yeah, but in those, if you're going to keep playing all the conditions, blah, 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 and that's a really dangerous situation where they could have aquaplaned into each other and caused a big crash.
I'm not saying that's conditions, that's people not paying attention.
But there's also wet conditions.
Yeah.
And that part of the circuit is particularly wet. And once again, it's not the first time this season we've had complete chaos under a safety car. It doesn't appear to be either. There's two things here. I'm not sure which one it is. Either the drivers aren't listening and aren't paying attention, or things aren't being properly communicated, or a mixture of the two. Because we had a similar situation at Alton Park.
Yes, I think this is different because it's on a restart rather than the safety car coming out.
Yeah.
And people are all eager to try and get the best advantage, and maybe weren't able to see through the spray. When you get cars speeding up and slowing down, trying to get their tyres in the right condition, you're going to have this bunching.
Ingram took a win on the road, but that wasn't the end of the story because once again, failed the ride height.
Not the only person to fail the ride height either. Chilton, who finished third, also failed the ride height. And we found out a lot more about ride height changes this weekend, in that there is a possibility to do it within a pit stop, and that the wet tyres that they put on are actually a different circumference to the slicks, which is something that I wasn't aware of before this weekend.
No, and they get even smaller during the race because of the compressions, pressures. So, yeah, you've got a choice of taking a slightly longer pit stop and upping your ride height, or you can take a slightly smaller pit stop and not up the ride height and hope that what you've got is already sufficient. I'm less on my high horse this weekend because A, that's apparent, and B, both cars and also Pierce have the same problem at Donington, which suggests it's a Hyundai issue rather than it's wet weather racing, except the damage. It's not damage related this weekend. It's a decision.
No, we didn't see either of those two cars go off or get any sort of damage.
My only comment would be, and I know it's not practical, and I know I'm not going to start another argument, but in those conditions, and I think everybody should be ride height tested, not just the top three. But I understand that's not practical. But if you finish, I mean, Watson won't have been ride height tested because he wasn't a leading car. He was in the top three. I'm not saying he would have failed the ride height. We'll never know. But that's my point. We'll never know.
I was going to say it's something that we don't know. It may well be done retrospectively, but I don't believe that
it's surely possible because he'd be out of Parc Fermé by that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that in those conditions, then you've got to do everybody rather than just the top three. But
yeah, so the top three finished after the first classification. Hill, Watson, Jelly. However, that was then amended once more for it to be then Hill, Watson, Collard. Jelly was slapped with a 1 second penalty.
Correct, along with Sutton and Taylor Smith, for gaining an unfair advantage under yellows. And Chilton alluded to that in his post-match interview where he said that a load of cars were overtaking under the safety car, which, again, bit of a mess. But anyway, the points-paying positions were Hill from Watson from Collard, Jelly 4th, Pearson 5th, Ashley Sutton in 6th for good recovery drive following his late pit stop, Taylor Smith 7th, Gamble 8th, Mocky Doble 9th, Dan Lloyd 10th, Turkington back to 11th, Dexter Patterson 12th, Rob Huff scoring points back on his BTC returning 13th, Dan Camish in 14th with a little bit of a response from him, and Nick Halstead in the points on 15th. What's also interesting is that 10th down or all a lap down.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, changing tyres mid-race, it really does shake things up, and that is probably the most chaos that we've had because of it. Um, Getting into race 2 then, the skies had dried, as had the track by this point, and all drivers would be starting on slick tyres. Going to the grid, Hill had a minor oil leak, which was found to be a loose oil cap, so I'm sure someone in the team might get a slap on the wrist for that. But there was a little bit of concern, but Dick Bennett was fairly happy and relaxed with it all, wasn't he?
Colin sneakily undoing it.
Yeah. Moffat would be having a pit lane start. One Motorsport had a lot of work to do to get Cook's car ready, and Moffat having both suffered damage in race 1. And Moffat would actually be starting from the back of the grid, only got one warm-up lap. Off the start then, Collard managed to get past Watson, as did Jelly, but Collard then locked up going into turn 3, running himself wide, sort of like edging Watson out as well, and Sutton was managed to make the cut back and gain 3 positions off his starting position, which was kind of a sign of things to come with the opportunities that he was looking to take.
That's what he's done all his career.
Yeah, very much so. Edwards was unfortunately had a side-to-side action with Osborne and lost out, going off just before the chicane at the top of the hill. Looks like a racing incident to me, side by side on the first lap.
Lap 1 bunching, yeah, absolutely.
She was just unlucky to come off second best. She was able to be pushed out of the gravel by the marshals and carry on, but I think she came into the pits later on in the race. There was a safety car as a result of that, only out for a lap or 2. And then on the restart, Hill managed to escape quite easily, and Sutton managed to pick Jelly off really quite easily as well. There was no real contest for that position. Watson managed to lose a handful of places on the restart, got shuffled out wide, maybe cold tyres, maybe a little bit of inexperience.
He lost on the race start, did not the safety car restart.
No, that was on the restart. He lost about 4 positions after that as well. Got shuffled out coming onto the back straight. Cook and Ingram were working their way through the field slowly but consistently.
Yeah.
When one made up a position, the other one then made up that position behind. Gamble was pushing and pushed Turkington out wide on the exit of the hairpin onto the pit straight, which meant that Turkington would go on to lose about 7 or 8 places and get shuffled right down the order. A weekend going from bad to worse for him, although it would get worse later on. Camish had rubbing bodywork towards the end of lap 8. When he came along the back straight from where we were viewing, I thought, oh God, that looks fairly major. I wondered whether it was an engine, but he did carry on, and I think some bodywork came off just as he got onto the pit straight. Morgan came into the pits at the end of lap 10 after falling through the field. I'm assuming a technical gremlin. Nothing more was said of it. He came back out for a little while and then was back in the pits.
A bit of puncture.
So it turned into more of a practice session for him. And the gap then started to close at the front, with Ash looking very quick through Sector 2. The way he's got that car set up, he seems to be able to jump through the chicane at the top of the hill, gain so much speed. And he kept looking closer and closer and closer. Coming towards the end of the race, though, Turkington went off on the penultimate lap after coming together with Camish. Now, I'm not sure whether something had broken on Camish's car, first of all. He certainly didn't like the move up the inside at turn 3. I think there was a PMR involved as well. And either the car snapped back to the right or Camish had a little dig back at Turkington, but it spun Turkington off into the gravel before the start of turn 4.
I can only assume it was a failure, because I would be amazed he's escaped a penalty. He's not been given a penalty for it, which makes me believe it must be a technical problem with the car, because otherwise that's a slam dunk as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, the fact of that is that Camish then went off with a broken front wheel. Whether that was because of the contact with Turkington or beforehand, we don't know. But as the race came to a finish, Hill took the win just from Sutton. But the two of them were in a class of their own for that race, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Have you got a finishing grid?
Yeah, I was just saying if Cameron had said anything about race 2, but he hasn't. So.
Okay.
But
I'd assume it's some sort of failure then.
Must be. Jake Hill won the race from Ash Sutton from Stephen Jelly on the podium. strong weekend for him in the opening 2 races, which
Yes.
is good to see. Aaron Taylor-Smith, 4th, getting his first independence win of the year, I think, possibly.
Yeah, I was amazed when they announced on the podium that was his first independent win, considering how well he's done at times and how consistent he's been.
Dan Lloyd up to 5th, Ricky Carr down in 6th, Ronan Pearson consolidating from race 1, getting another top 10 finish in 7th, Josh Cook from the back of the grid to 8th, followed by Andrew Watson 9th, Tom Ingram making the top 10 from the back of the grid, George Gamble with a decent showing in 11th, Mikey Doble, who seems to be cementing 12th for himself every weekend now, Dexter Patterson down in 13th, Rob Huff scoring points again in 14th, and Rory Butcher from the back of the grid to 15th.
Yeah.
Only one to mention is that Dan Rowbottom had another problem in race 3 and dropped to the back of the grid. Again, him and Camish will be leaving Knockhill with painful.
Yeah, it's not been a good weekend for those two.
No. The race number 3 saw ball number 7 pulled out, which put the local hero, Ronan Pearson, on pole.
You were very pleased about that, weren't you?
Well, I was, because I had got a Scott on the podium, but as we'll get to it, Tom Ingram is mean, so we'll sort that in a minute. We saw delayed start to race 3 due to a last-minute downpour as cars were on the grid. Some cars were going to start on slicks despite the torrential monsoon.
One car we think was going to start on slicks.
Although in Turkington's defence, until the second wave of monsoon hit, I agreed with his decision because the rain was short and sharp. Then it did clear.
Yeah, well, it started coming down lightly at first. I was looking over the hill where the masts are at Knockhill, thinking it's quite dark, and started to sprinkle with rain. I thought, this is going to make it a difficult tyre choice. And then, as you say, the heavens absolutely opened.
Then it stopped.
Yeah, but there were so many big puddles.
Yeah, and then it started again, so he had no choice. Gal went round in the safety car, and I believe it was then declared a wet weather race, and Turkington was able to change on the grid to wets. It was also so wet that the safety car led them away for the first 5 laps. Sensible decision. The spray was ridiculous. The standing water where we were stood at the hairpin was a lake.
It was.
The marshals were getting their fishing rods out to try and catch a few bits of trout. It was that deep. So, yeah, absolutely the right thing to do. And also, it benefited Pearson, who was able to lead away from a rolling start rather than a standing start.
Very much so.
And when the safety car did go in, Pearson caught everybody napping and went and built up a 2-second plus advantage over the first couple of laps.
I think part of that was down to the jump that he got, but also his knowledge of the track and where the water sits and stuff, and he knows where he can push hard and ease off in other places.
We saw Ingram make a really good move on Watson down the inside in the pouring rain. Very brave, very committed, and no contact, which is always good. Hill was the leading BMW, was struggling, the cork in the bottle at this point. Well, he wasn't leading BMW, actually. He was behind Jelly at this point. They had overtaken each other under safety car and then swapped back beforehand. I've jumped ahead. I'll do that again.
Yeah.
I've jumped too far ahead. Hill was in the battle, but quite slow in the BMW. It's always struggling a little bit in conditions in the rain. We then saw Lloyd go second after Collard. Collard has been so frustrating this weekend.
I think you said a couple of times this weekend that Collard will either win it or bin it.
Yeah.
And that very much seems to be the way that his season might be turning.
Collard was slow off the hairpin, went wide, aquaplaned a little bit, and then rather than just take the medicine that he lost the position, tried to get it back immediately.
Bash door handles and
all that stuff. They ended up being squeezed out down turn 1 and tumbled down the order. And
he launched it across the inside curve, didn't he?
Yeah, he went into space. Yeah, absolutely. Had a trip into space. I'm amazed he didn't break anything on that car, given it wasn't too dissimilar from the Camish one at Snetterton. No, he didn't break anything either. But it's amazing, isn't it? A small tap to the rear can snap a toe link, but launching it into space is that's fine. Halstead then crashed on his own at the hairpin, locked up, aquaplaned. Yeah.
To be fair, we were standing down at the hairpin for that final race, and with all the action of the other cars coming through and going past, like all the cars have gone through, waiting for him to come back the next time. It's like, oh, Halstead's in the barrier.
Yeah, I think the fact that we both went, oh, okay, sort of shrugged, is just sort of, it's not been a particularly triumphant.
It had been a slightly better weekend for him this weekend until that.
Yeah, it had, but this caused the safety car, and De Leon came into the pits under this point and be followed a couple of laps later by Rob Huff. So Team Haas reliability going really well as usual there. It's frustrating, it's difficult, and if it's even affecting people like Rob Huff, it's It's not just inexperienced drivers. The cars are. Every race there seems to be a reliability issue for at least one of the cars.
Yeah.
And it's getting a quite difficult watch at this point. And it's just the drivers I feel for, because they're just blotting their copybooks, unfortunately.
Yeah, when the safety car boards came out, there was a slight incident coming down into the hairpin where it looked as if Hill had got ahead of Jelly, and just before the safety car restart, they swapped back, crucially. I assume that would have been a team order.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to get the positions right and make sure that there was no penalty afterwards.
Collard continued his door banging routine with Cook. I'm amazed it's didn't end in tragedy, because they were taking lumps out of each other down Duffers Dip and up the Black Circle chicane.
Yep.
Ultimately didn't work out, and again Collard got shuffled and forced out wide. It's Ricky obviously likes to race in a certain style, more associated with the 90s, early 2000s, and that's fine. It's not a problem. It's exciting, but I think that if you look at touring cars in the modern era,
cars are a little more fragile nowadays, I think.
And if you look at the previous champions, what wins the race is the age-old adage: to finish first you must finish.
Yeah,
and we're seeing that more and more in the modern touring car age, aren't we?
Yep, very much so.
Hill. No, Sutton, that was very fast and managed to speed off into the distance following catching Pearson after the restart. Just, you said it, that it was like he was racing on a dry track with slicks at times. He just had so much grip, so much turn, and the traction they've got coming out of corners. It's like a real drive car. I don't know how they've done it. And you've just got, whatever your thoughts on this being a one-car championship, all that nonsense, fine, but you've got to just tip your hats what Napa have done this year, because that car is a monster.
When he came into the hairpin behind Pearson, he must have been 3-4 car lengths behind him. Closed up a little bit on the brakes, but the traction out of the hairpin, I wasn't expecting him to get past him on exit, so I'd already concentrated on the next lot of cars coming round, and you were like, he's past him. I was like, what?
He was past before the entrance of the pit.
Yeah,
just on pure traction and drive alone. It's that. Yeah, we've said our thing about Hard in the past. Napa in the past. I'm not going to repeat it now, but what they've done there is just fantastic, really, isn't it? Hill was trying to make up positions further back and had a bit of contact with Stephen Jelly.
Took a chunk out of him, practically. Yeah. Missed his braking point, locked up, fair enough, but don't hit your teammate.
No.
It's the worst people to hit of all time are people in your team, and then all of the BMWs managed to drop down through the order.
Yeah, the garage in the BMW...
Frosty, I think.
Didn't look great, did it?
Frosty.
No. It's unfortunately for Hill, I wouldn't say it's every weekend he's making a mistake, but he's certainly making more mistakes this season than he did last. And it's a shame. I think it's frustration in some parts because he's not got the car underneath him this year.
Yep.
This would have been a circuit where he'd have looked to do really well. And actually, 2 wins. He was doing really well at. But
it'd be difficult to grade him this week, I think.
But the problem is the gap is so big that they've got to go for these moves. But yeah. Hill would then try and fight back and ended up running wide at the hairpin, which was another uncharacteristic mistake by him.
Didn't have much success down there this weekend.
That dropped him back down the order. Then a lap later, Colin tried to overtake him, and Hill decided no and tried to barge him off the road. So, I said to you on the way home that it could be worse. We could be the panic liaison officer at BMW trying to do the post-race briefing with the drivers, because I don't think anyone's going to be happy with each other. Apart from Morgan, just sit there like, well, at least you guys got to race. But, wasn't a particularly good weekend for BMW. And I get the feeling, I might be wrong, I think they're struggling with the 4-car team and the calibre of driver.
I'm not quite sure what's going on. They don't seem to have found a solid setup this season.
No.
And I think that's really hampering them.
They don't seem to have set any ground rules on how to race, and if they have, they're not being listened to.
They're not being followed.
Because if you're looking at, apart from this weekend where Osborne and Cameron have come together in wettish conditions, and I suppose you could say it's wet conditions here as well, so that, make it fair. But you can think back to Croft where they cleared a plan. You're not coming through in race 1 because you've got the wrong tyre, but Robot will let you pass at the end if you're still there. Race 2, Sutton, come through first corner, mate. You're on softs, just go. And actually, they're managing the, I'll say, ego and the expectations and all of that of the drivers pretty well. When you consider you've got a 3-time champion, a would have been champion, and quite an exciting prospect in Robot who's able to mix it at the front more often than not. And actually, they're doing quite well. You think back
I think it helps that there is more of a hierarchy there.
Yes, but that hierarchy's only been established as the season's gone on.
Yes, very much so.
If you think back to Snetterton, where BMW went on the same tyre all day and ended up just looking ridiculous in race 3, they haven't done that at Napa. I think Napa have certainly managed the 4-car team better.
Yes.
And you could argue that Osborne isn't as at the front as much, but then Jelly's not been at the front as much.
No, Jelly's had quite a few off weekends this season.
I think there is real needle between Hill and Turkington. I think we saw it last season at points, and we've seen it this season too.
Some of the interviews. What do you think about Turkington? Are you going to work with... I don't care where Turkington is. I'm driving for myself, basically.
Yeah, whereas I get the feelings a bit more of a one-team ethos at Napa.
Yeah.
Again, that's potentially helped by the fact that Caris has been out of this championship battle since about round 2, realistically speaking. And whereas Turkington and Hill are both conscious they've got to be in this of getting points. But yeah, it's not been going well for BMW, and I don't think either of them finished second in the championship either. But
no, nor do
I. Cook ended up in a very lonely second, got past Pearson with pretty much ease. Pearson basically signalled him through. Yeah. I think understood he was on the slower car.
Yeah, the rate at which Cook caught him as well, there was no point fighting it because both of them could have ended up off the road.
Exactly. Cook wasn't able to make it up any time to Sutton, though, so finished with quite a lonely second. Ingram was trying to get beyond Lloyd. A few little kisses to try and force his point on
kisses.
Lloyd. Yeah, little kisses, little
kisses.
Little
I'm not sure Lloyd will think they were kisses.
Eventually got through. To be fair to Tom, every time he did touch him, he backed off, made sure he didn't get the advantage. And okay, you could say, well, he's still touching, but it's wet.
It could have gone a lot further. It could have spun Lloyd round, but he made sure that it didn't quite go that far. Did
it by the book. Crease was then sent off by Jelly. We only really saw it the once. It wasn't particularly exciting either way. Row bottom into the pits with another issue. And then the real big talking point, I guess, is that Ingram did catch Pearson, and Pearson let him go.
Told you he would.
Yeah,
I told you at the time.
Pearson let him through, and it appears to be, from what Tom was saying,
for the championship,
a team order. And look, I get it, and I don't get it. On the one hand,
it is so difficult with it being his home round and the weekend that Pearson has had.
Yeah. And would have been his first podium.
That would have topped it off really, really nicely, having missed out on the Donington one as well.
Yeah, would have been his first podium.
But we're at the stage of the season where the team have got to think championship.
They are, but I'd also make the counterpoint, and you're right, and it is the grown-up decision is it was the right call. Yes. But I'd also say my emotional side says, is there a championship fight anyway? Would it have hurt?
You've got to give that option.
Yeah, because if you're right, because if Ingram missed out the title by that number of points, by not swapping them, yeah, it is the right call. However, this one, it hurts. And I think, and to be fair to Ingram, he wasn't happy about the situation either, and you could see he was very conflicted about it. Obviously, Pearson won the Jack Sears for that round and indeed the weekend, but it just is a bit of a taste, isn't it, that he's lost a podium at his home circuit, his first podium. But you don't know if his time will come again. That's the thing.
Nothing's guaranteed. Rowbottom did it for Sutton at Croft. Yeah, I know it doesn't have quite the same connotations.
Rowbottom's a race winner, multiple
it's playing the team game.
But Rowbottom's a multiple race winner and multiple podium.
It's playing the team game.
It is, and look, it's the right. I'm not going to argue with at this point. It is the right call. It's just not a nice call. No. But I get it. But equally, when Sutton wins a championship by 90 points, it's going to look even more stupid. But
Sutton has somehow, even after that first race, come out of this weekend smelling of absolute roses, and builds an extensive lead now in the championship. I think 37, 39 points. And the weekends that Turkington and Camish have had really have put them at a long arm's length.
Well, Sutton is now on 310, which I'm fairly sure has won the title in the past, that number.
Close, yeah.
Close. I think 312, 314.
The fact that he has 8 victories this season, I think I said to you in the car on the way back to where we were staying, is it possible for him to win half the races? And you said, well, I think he'll at least win a third of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's top on 310. Ingram is second on 273, so that's a 40-point gap effectively.
Yeah, it's 37.
Yeah. Jake Hill back on 260, so that's a 50-point gap. That's too much. I'm sorry. I know I keep flip-flopping a little bit, but for me, that this weekend is a turning point in the championship. 50 points with 3 rounds to go, for me, is insurmountable.
It's a big gap.
If Hill wins it from here, it'll be the greatest turnaround in touring car history, I think.
Yeah, possibly.
I just don't
Certainly
see it.
in recent history.
I just don't see it happening. Turkington is definitely out of it now on 229, which puts him effectively 80 points back.
Yep.
That's done.
Yeah.
Camish on 220, I think he might be out of it as well, Sam. 9
Yep.
points back. Do you finally agree that Camish is out of it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he's had a shocking weekend.
Cook 191.
In that lonely 6th place.
Yeah, absolutely. Robot on 144. Collard on 140. Morgan in 9th on 126. And Roy Butcher into the top 10 on 115. Just looking through who sort of moved up. I mean, Gamble's now on 19th on 52. He moved ahead of Osborne.
Gamble had a decent weekend this weekend.
Okay.
He kept his nose clean for the most part and got some decent results.
Yep. Andrew Watson's moved up to 16th for 54 points. That's pretty good. And his, Dan Lloyd is up to 15th on 72, level with Tom Chilton. Interestingly, Moffat is ahead of Lloyd, which on form I find difficult to believe, but it is what it is.
Very much so.
And then if we have a quick look at what that's done to the teams' championships as well, shall we? Just while we are here. The manufacturers and constructors title, BMW remarkably lead the way on 579 from Motorbase Ford on 568. Accelerate on 497 and Toyota on 392. In the teams overall, Napa topped that by over 100 points now.
Yeah, that's not much of a surprise, is it?
No, so they're on 525. Bristol Street Motors are a second on 406.
Wow.
And Team BMW on 390.
It doesn't look good for them, does it?
No, that's only the 3 cars.
Yeah, I know.
Taylor's on his own.
I know.
But yeah, not ideal. In independent drivers, Cook leads that and has won that. He's nearly 100 points clear of Aidan Moffat in second.
Yeah.
Dan Lloyd is currently third. And Taylor Smith has caught up to Lloyd a little bit this weekend. So if he can finish in the top 3, he'll be very happy indeed.
Very much so.
Then we have the independent teams with 3 rounds to go, and they will be at the top. Is One Motorsport with Starline Racing on 382. Car Store Powermax 343. They've closed the gap a little bit.
They are, and all 3 of them seem to be having consistently decent weekends recently. Yeah. Certainly more than obviously the 3 drivers at one.
Absolutely. The Jack Series is getting very interesting.
So tasty.
Doble leads by a point from Andrew Watson. From Dexter Patterson, who's on 292, which puts him 16 points back.
Yep.
So not insurmountable. Osborne is still just about in it on 283. And then I think Pearson on 264 is probably now out of it.
Yeah.
With Jack Butel 6th on 197. He's ahead of Nick Halstead, Nick Hamilton, Jade Edwards, Will Power, Darryl DeLyon. And then the one we all care about, the one we get out of bed for in the morning, Sam, it's the Goodyear Wingfoot Award. And just because he's going to win everything else, Sutton wins that. Was leading that story on 125 from
no real
Jake
surprise.
Hill. And if Napa carry on getting all poles, then yeah. I haven't got the stats offhand, but I'm going to have to go do some research, I think, before our next show, because I can't think of a season where a team has had a win at every round and potentially can take the pole at every round.
Yeah.
I think the only one that might be able to go back to, just off the top of my head, might be the Integra days of Halfords back in 0506.
Really quick car.
Yeah, and technically, possibly, might have been illegal or controversial car.
We know it was a really quick car because Plato would complain about it.
Controversial car at the time, but obviously it was legal.
Yep.
Because it was allowed to race, but it did cause controversy at the time. But I think that might be, off the top of my head, maybe the Vectra.
Possibly.
I'll have to do some research on that.
Yep. Your final thoughts then for the weekend?
My final thoughts for the weekend are that Knockhill was great. Obviously, the vlog will cover that in more detail, but we'd definitely like to go back, just not every year. I'm going to end on a bit of a moan. The hard situation has been really badly handled, in my opinion. We don't know what's happened to Nick. We don't know if Huff's in for the rest of the season. Obviously, it's only for Knockhill at the moment. But
yeah, when we went through the trade stands, I think you said that all Nick's stuff was at half price, which is really unusual to see halfway through a season.
Got reductions on it for sure, yeah. Which, and there's just no word from Team Hard. I think that's the thing that's bugging me the most, is that we all get that budgets run out. It's not great, but you think to the Bobby Thompson one, it's been very clear, very open.
Yep.
The Nick one, which makes me wonder, and speculation starts to grow, is there an actual falling out here? Rather than just an amicable split or running out of money. And that's where rumours start, unfortunately. Yeah.
The best way to quash those rumours is to tell everyone what the real situation is. But I can understand that some things may need to be sorted out first of all.
But even the Will Powell situation at One Motorsport, whilst the full story isn't out yet, they've both acted quickly with a statement which gave you the bare facts of what you needed to know, which was Will Powell is not racing anymore, and we're not going to comment further at this time. Fine. That cuts everything dead. We know where we stand. Are we going to see Nick at Donington in a couple of weeks' time? We don't know.
I doubt it.
We don't know.
Doubt it, but we shall see. We shall see.
Yeah, so I don't want to end on a bad note, but if Hard are running 6 cars next year, I don't know.
If Hard are running next year, we shall see. I really,
Your final thoughts?
Really enjoyed this weekend. I think Knockhill is an excellent circuit, and the weather and the changeable conditions just made it just that little bit more special. And yeah, go and watch our vlog if you haven't already, and you'll see some of our behind the scenes of what we got up to and the fun that we had for a weekend up in Knockhill.
I think that's it. Obviously, we'll be back with the driver grades shortly for the weekend. They're going to be an absolute pain to do this.
They could be all over the place this weekend.
Absolutely. I think Sutton's a star. I think that's the only one that writes itself at this stage. But yeah, other than that, I think that's probably it. We'll be back, to say, for a full review, full preview for Donington Park in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Until then, goodbye.
Bye.